Hello, I'm George Brown, and I want to welcome you to the next in our series on the Armchair Traveler. Today, we're going to be going to Spain, a country in Europe that should be very familiar to Americans. But if you're like me, it was one of the last European countries that I visited. First time I went to Europe was in the 1960s as a graduate student during summer holidays, and Spain really wasn't on the itinerary in that era. Uh, I have one of the old books here, Europe on $5 a day. Some of you may remember this. This was the kind of the student traveler guide to Europe back in the 50s and 60s. Europe on $5 a day spells out how you can go all over Europe and spend only $5 a day. I pulled this out and looked at it to see what he said about Spain. Spain is not listed as a country. Madrid gets one page only. Let me just read you part of what he says about Madrid. Spain is the cheapest country in the Western world, but that's not the major reason for going to Madrid. This is a city where you'll feel that you've entered a time machine for a journey into the past. London and Paris often resemble the modern cities of the US, but Madrid never does. This is where the rocket tempo of the 20th century never reached. Its people carry on a style of living that has barely changed since the 1600s, dignified, slow, proud, and with a constant hospitality towards strangers. So this was written, more than 60 years ago, I guess. But Spain really wasn't on the American travelers list then. I think partly maybe because it was a little out of the way, but also because it was the era of Francisco Franco. We'll be talking a little about Franco in a little while, but he was kind of the last of the major European fascist leaders. Was in power until the mid-1970s. And so it was a place that was kind of shunned by both the Western European countries as well as the United States. But that's all changed in recent years. And in the past 4 or 5 years, I've had the chance to visit Spain several times. And I became intrigued by it, both the land, but also the culture, the people, and the antiquities. And so I think if we're thinking about traveling to Spain, it's good to start with a little bit of history. Now, in 15 or 20 minutes, we're not going to do much detail about the long history of this country, but at least what I would like to do is suggest some of the themes of Spanish history. As an experienced armchair traveler by now, you will know how to explore on your own. So there may be some of these themes that will appeal to you that you would like to follow up on your own. Well, let's take a little look here at some of the themes of Spanish history. So here are Spain, España. What do we know about Spain? Well, here's a contemporary map. It's worth looking at it just to fix in our mind where Spain is in Europe. Right down you have the Pyrenees Mountains, the beautiful mountain chain that really separates Spain or the Iberian Peninsula from France. And then down at the other end you have Gibraltar and the very short crossing through the mouth of the Mediterranean over to Morocco. So Spain and Portugal making up the Iberian Peninsula. Now, if we go back historically, 10,000 years or more, there were different tribes of people that settled in this area from prehistoric times. You had the Celtic groups coming in from the north and coming probably across from North Africa, a group called the Iberians. And so in what we know as Spain, you had a group mixing together, the Celtic Iberians, which really populated Spain in the early years. As the European culture, Mediterranean cultures developed in the east, they explored increasingly to the western reaches of the Mediterranean. You had the Phoenicians first coming through North Africa all the way into Spain. So you had the Phoenician towns or trading centers being established early on during the era of the Greek Empire back many centuries ago. Phoenician ruins near Cadiz, so you can still find the remnants of the Phoenician culture. And then the best known of the Phoenicians from Carthage, Hannibal, who you'll remember from your grade school history, took his elephants across the Alps and defeated the Romans, coming through what now is Spain. Down here was Carthage across in North Africa, but coming across Spain and France, coming into Rome from the north, surprising the Romans and having some victories there. Eventually, in the Punic Wars, they were called, the Carthaginians were defeated by the Romans, but they left their imprint throughout the area, including along the Mediterranean coast of Spain. Then you come to Rome. Rome was ruled really Spain, or took over the coastal areas of Spain for about 600 years. And it was during this time that the Romans brought a lot of the language that influenced what we now know as the Spanish language. Also the laws, the roads, the organization really. So the Romans instituted an organized, much more organized and unified culture than had been there before. You still had the different tribes that you see here. And in the interior, the Romans had much less influence. But this lasted for about 600 years, with the coastal region of Spain very much part of the Roman Empire and the Roman culture. Barcelona was established as a Roman coastal fortress town. And there's still considerable Roman ruins that you can find scattered along the Mediterranean coast and inland from the coast in Spain. After Rome, you had the Visigoths. That's the Germanic tribes who were coming into Italy and disrupting Rome, but then all the way down into Spain. So you had the Visigoths coming down, and in a very decentralized way. They had their own king, but really ruled in a feudalistic, decentralized way, took over and attempted really to have some kind of unified force in Spain. But that changed in 711. You had with the Moors coming across from Morocco, across from Tangier, coming over, invading Spain, taking over really almost all of Spain. They went up into France, but were driven back from France. But then from 711 till 1492, the Moors had tremendous influence over Spain. The Moors, when they came, didn't bring large settlements. They brought their armies, intermingled with the natives. Islamic rulers that spread their culture quite widely throughout Spain. And this was part of the expansion of the Islamic Empire. It goes back to Baghdad. And then by the time they came into Spain, you can see occupied all the way up to the Pyrenees, come up to Poitiers, but were pushed back, but maintained control over much of Spain for quite a long time, from 711 to 1492. In Granada, you have the great palace of the Alhambra. If you've been there, then you'll know this is really a one-of-a-kind place to visit. If you haven't been to Spain, surely this will be on your list to visit. You had the Moors taking over Spain, but then the Catholic Spaniards over the centuries pushed back, wanting to reconquer. They called it the Reconquista. And so you had, beginning in the north, gradually over the decades, over the centuries, regaining control from the Moors. So that by the time you come to the middle of the 15th century, really the only part that was left under the control of the Moors was Granada, down in the southern part of Spain. And then we come to the year 1492, a year to remember for several reasons. You had the recent union between Ferdinand and Isabel. Isabel was the ruler of Castile, the middle part of Spain, Ferdinand of Aragon on the Mediterranean. And back in those days, in the Middle Ages, the marriages were made for political reasons. And she had a choice. She could marry Ferdinand and join Castile and Aragon, which would be the central part of Spain with the Mediterranean part, or a prince from Portugal. She chose Ferdinand from Aragon, and that really set the future of Spain as being looking more towards the Mediterranean. And so they were able to consolidate their power using military force, but also the use of the Catholic, the church at the same time. But their first task was to drive out the remaining Moors, to complete the reconquest, as it were, of Spain. They did that in 1492 when they laid siege to Granada in the Alhambra, and then worked out a surrender. So the Moorish leader surrendered without having to have a battle. An arrangement was made so that the Moors and Muslims could either return to North Africa or they could stay in Spain if they converted to Catholicism. Now, you'll recognize the man on the right. This is Christopher Columbus. The same year, 1492, he had been looking for sponsorship to enable him to try out his theory that he could get to Asia by going west across the great ocean sea, what we know as the Atlantic Ocean. He had failed to get sponsorship from the Portuguese king, but he went and actually went to the camp of Isabel and Ferdinand as they were completing their victory over Granada, and finally convinced them to sponsor him with a small fleet of 3 ships to set out and for the results, which we know was to discover for the Europeans the American continents, and for Spain opened up the tremendous wealth that they would take from the Americas over the following centuries. 1492. It was also the year when the Catholic Inquisition got going in Spain. In addition to expelling the Moors, the Muslims who did not convert to Christianity, the Jews were expelled. And so you had in 1492 the expulsion of the Jews who had played a very important role in the Spanish society, and up until then had been treated with respect. But in 1492, you had tens of thousands of Jews expelled. A lot of them went to Turkey, other parts in the Mediterranean that would accept them in. Some stayed and converted. Some pretended to convert but didn't convert, and they became the ones that were particularly targeted by the Inquisition. Now, the Jewish heritage is still, you can still find it. Not many Jews themselves in Spain, but some wonderful remnants of the Jewish heritage. Here you have, well, in Lisbon, but then in Toledo and Seville, you can go and visit the synagogues and some of the other places that were kept by this was the Jewish quarter, as it were, in Seville. So in 1492, Spain really begins to emerge in a way that resembles the way it looks today. So on the left, you have the kind of the consolidation, and after 1492, you have Aragon and Castile joining together in 1469 with the marriage of Ferdinand and Isabella. You have the taking over Granada with the expulsion of the Moors, and then in the north in Navarre in 1512. So it was by 1512, then more or less resembles the Spain that we know today in terms of the geography. Now, it was not unified in the sense of unified country. You had, in Aragon, you had the Catalan, different language, you had the Basque up here in the northwest. So you had quite a few regional centers of population and culture in those years. Now, over the next few centuries, the wealth from New Spain really in Central America and South America really provided the money that enabled Spain to really, in one sense, become a major European power. So that was the plus side of all of the gold and silver that was brought in. The minus for Spain was that the dependence on the gold coming in from the New World really put Spain behind in terms of developing a modern economy. So the economy was really based on being able to have the gold coming in. That funded the nobility and the armies over the centuries. And you had a population that was really dependent on that influx of gold bullion as it was coming in from the New World. But the native economy really stagnated. You did have, though, what they consider, what Spain considers its golden age, the golden age of culture. El Greco, 1541 to 1614, and he painted, and you can find some of his famous works in the major museums, particularly in Toledo, the ancient capital where he lived. You had Diego Velázquez, 1599 to 1660, who painted for the aristocracy. You see the picture on the left, but also he did paintings of everyday life, which gives us a look into the 17th century life in Spain. You had Cervantes, who wrote the Don Quixote, the great work, the early kind of modern novel, Don Quixote, Man of La Mancha, and really with his parody on the very decrepit Spanish nobility. During these ages, you had the emergence of the bullfighting as a unique sport, I guess you would call it, although I'm not sure that I really consider that, but bullfighting became important, along with the flamenco, which probably was introduced maybe by the Moors, maybe by the Roma. We used to call them gypsies in that area. But the guitar and the flamenco becoming a very much part of the Spanish culture. Francisco Goya, another painter later on, this is in the 18th and 19th century. The paintings on the right are interesting. So this is the naked Maha, M-H-A-A on the top, and the closed Maha on the bottom. He apparently painted these for a patron. The woman, the different ideas on who it is, who the model was. But the story is, I don't know if it's true, the story is that these two paintings, because the Inquisitions, the church did not like the idea of the nude painting, the man that he painted them for had it arranged so in the studio where he had them that he could cover the nude one with the one that was dressed, sliding it over in front of it somehow. So in case the authorities came, he would show them the clothed and not the naked Maha. But it was a time of, throughout all these, I'm not going to go into all the different kings and the dynasties. You had first the Habsburgs, and then the Bourbons from France. And during those centuries, Spain was tied in and linked to all the political wars and changes going on in Europe. And it said that there were 90 different wars between 1500 and 1936. And the great Spanish Navy was defeated twice. On the left, you see it was when the Spanish Armada was defeated in 1588. And then off the coast of Cadiz in the Atlantic Ocean when the British defeated the Spanish and French in 1805. In 1808, you had Napoleon invades Spain to really reestablish the Bourbon king there. And to his surprise, there was a popular uprising. So this was coming not too far after the French Revolution, which came after the American Revolution. And so you had an independence movement, and you had Spaniards wanting to establish their independence. And there's a great painting by Francisco Goya, one of the great painters of that day, the Day of Madrid, and it reflects May 3rd, 1808. May 3rd still is a holiday in Spain, and particularly in Madrid. This is a painting that he did showing the execution, the firing squad, really, of the French against the Spanish revolutionaries or patriots, he would say. That's quite a very powerful painting that he did. So you went in the 19th century through the first half of the 20th century. Spain goes really from wealth to decline to chaos and dictatorship. It had its War of Independence that was part of that we just saw, 1807 to 14. Then you had the loss of the American Empire, where all of the South American, Central American countries established their independence, threw off Spain during those years. And you had the kind of the final collapse of the Spanish-American Empire, 1898, with the Spanish-American War, at which point the Spanish also lost the Philippines, Puerto Rico, Cuba. But it's interesting to note that between 1880 and 1930, about 4 million Spanish moved to the Americas. So just as there was immigrants coming into the United States from Northern Europe, you had Spanish immigrants leaving Spain because of the economic problems there and moving to Argentina and other South American or Latin American countries. There continued to be this polarization where you had the church and the traditional aristocracy versus the evolving Republican side with the socialists, unionists, progressives, anarchists. The opposition to the traditional powers that be was in no ways unified. It's very diverse, and a lot of internal fighting among the opposition. So you have then this political chaos in the 1920s, 7 different constitutions between 1808 and 1938, finally leading to the Spanish Civil War, where there's a takeover by the military led by Francisco Franco on the side of what was called the nationalists against the Republicans who were trying to maintain the Spanish Republic. That was a very brutal war, kind of precursor to World War II, fought in Spain between 1936 and 1939, leading to the Franco dictatorship, which went from 1939 all the way to 1975. Now, during that time, there was some great artistic talent in Spain. Antonio Gaudi, in the second half of the 19th century, first of the 20th century, created these incredible architectural gems in Barcelona. And if you've been to Barcelona, or if you go there, you'll go to the great cathedral that even now are still being completed or still being constructed. It's one of these buildings that may never be completed, I suspect, but it's an incredible place to go and to see his vision and the kind of whimsical architecture that he developed. It's also the land of Pablo Picasso. 1881 to 1973, Picasso was from here, and the great museums both in Barcelona and Madrid with his works. Salvador Dali, from close by to Barcelona, his works during this era. But the Civil War itself was a terrible encounter between the nationalists led by Franco and the rather diverse group of Republicans. So you had the nationalists, Franco people, the military, the church, the rural areas, supported by Italy and Germany. So here's where you had Franco getting some direct support from the rising fascist powers of Europe in the years prior to the outbreak of World War II. And opposed by unionists, socialists, communists, anarchists, and supported somewhat by the Soviet Union and by international brigades. People from the United States, Australia, other places that were idealists or revolutionaries that went and tried to support the Republicans. Ernest Hemingway was there during this time, and his book, For Whom the Bell Tolls, you might want to get that back out. You probably read it in high school or college, but it's a great work of fiction, but it's based on the terrible and rather brutal aspects of the Spanish Civil War. Now, one of the great artworks that came at this time is this great work, Guernica, by Picasso. Picasso had been commissioned to do a piece of art for an exposition, and before he got started on it, there was a terrible bombing by the Germans of the town of Guernica. And it really was one of the first kind of city bombings that became so common in World War II. But it created quite a response, particularly from the pro-Republicans. And so you have this painting, this huge painting that was done by Picasso. It was not kept in Spain. It was in Europe, and then it was in the Metropolitan Museum in New York until the late 1980s, I believe it was. It was finally repatriated to Spain, where you can see it in Barcelona or in Madrid today. So for me, it's interesting that art kind of reflects history. You have the Goya painting of May 3rd in 1808, showing the firing squad, and then you have the kind of modernistic depiction of the dismemberment of people and animals caused by war in Picasso's great work. So Goya, 1808, Picasso, 1937. Now Franco had a long reign. He served as Spain's dictator from 1939 to 1975 because of his association with the World War II fascists. He was denied initially entry into the United Nations, and there was really a prolonged international isolation of Spain by the United States and the Europeans after World War II. Very much an authoritarian rule. With the Cold War, Spain opened up a little to the U.S. and Europe, or I should say that Europe and the U.S. decided to look the other way a little bit because they favored having an alliance with Franco. But after his death, there was a return to democracy, first with the establishment of the monarchy, where after Franco's death, Juan Carlos I was installed as a really continuation of the Spanish monarchy, and a few years later, a new constitution was approved, and now his son Felix VI is the constitutional monarch, somewhat like some of the other European countries like England, where you have a constitutional monarch. After the reestablishment of the democracy, then in 1985, Spain joined the EU fully, not till 1986. So this illustrates how far really slow it was that for Spain to really get into the international community because of the long dictatorship of Franco. Now the current political spectrum is, this is Pedro Sanchez, who's the current prime minister. But like other European countries where you have a parliamentary system, you have a range of political parties, so he has to govern with a coalition. His party is the left center party here. The party in the most recent election that declined was the popular right party. The ultra-nationalist party, like some of the other European countries, emerged for the first time with a small representation, but something that had not been there prior. Now, we're talking about Spain as though it was a well-unified country, but it still has its different regions, particularly Catalonia and the Basque country. In Catalonia, it's a different language. When you visit there, they will remind you that you're in Catalonia, not Spain. And here's a few years ago, they had a referendum. Catalonia is not Spain. And the referendum was to establish a separate country, really to break away, somewhat like Quebec in Canada, except Catalonia and Barcelona is where a lot of the industry is, a lot of the wealth is. So this is a part of Spain that Spain would not want to let go. So there's an ongoing tension between the central government in Madrid and the regional government in Barcelona over the degree of autonomy. So kind of the current status is that Catalonia and the Basque country have somewhat autonomy in certain areas, but they would like to have even more independence. Today, though, Spain has become a top destination, along with Italy, probably is one of the top tourist destinations in the world. People want to go to Spain, in part because it's a great place to visit, but I suspect in part because in prior years, maybe it wasn't on people's bucket list, but now it is. You can start in Barcelona. If you're coming from Atlanta, for example, there are nonstop flights to Barcelona. It's a great port city. A lot of the artwork, the architecture that you can see, it's a great place to visit. is it really Spain? That's the question that you'll have. Here's the Catalan flag. But it really is a feast for the eyes. You see the Gaudi Cathedral. This is a Juan Miró gallery. Some more of a Gaudi. Picasso. There's a Picasso museum. Great food. The tapas is great, where you go in and you take your little bites, your tapas, and then you pay at the end based on the number of empty toothpicks you have. I guess it's somewhat an honor system. The one thing I noticed the last time I was there is that the main shopping street, very famous Ramblas, it's called, goes from kind of the center down to the port, with just jam packed. It's getting awfully crowded, and one of the main reasons for that is that Barcelona has become a top cruise port, maybe the top cruise port in the Mediterranean. So all of the cruise lines that are doing their Mediterranean cruises will use Barcelona as one of the main ports for beginning and ending their cruises. And so if you're in Barcelona on a day when the ships are there, there might be 6 or 8 of these big cruise ships, 3,000 to 6,000 people on each of them, and they all want to go down and walk down the Ramblas. And so that takes some of the fun away from it. It gets awfully crowded and unpleasant, but also if everybody that you're mingling with are other tourists, it's not so nice. But you can go on, and when I went with a group a couple of years ago, we went by train. The Spaniards have some of the greatest trains, I think, in the world. The AVE is the name of the system, and you go in 3 hours from Barcelona to Madrid. It's just a great way to travel, not just Barcelona to Madrid, but across the country. So if you're going, I suggest you take some train trips. Madrid itself is great. Barcelona and Madrid are very different cities. Madrid is probably more laid back. It has an older feel to it. It's the center of the capital, the center of the government. Prado, the old palace, converted into one of the world's great art galleries. So it's right up there with the Louvre, I would say, in terms of a great art gallery. Another one of the galleries here within about a mile, no less than a mile from the Prado, is Reina Sofia, where you can see the Pablo Picasso painting here, which is huge on the wall. And it's interesting to see. You get up close, you can see the detail, but it's also interesting to see the people as they come and gaze at this, which is really a statement against war that had been so prevalent in Spain through the centuries. About an hour's ride on a train from Madrid, you get to Toledo, the ancient capital. It had been the capital for the Moors before they were pushed back. It's up on a mountaintop, surrounded almost by a natural river, but it's just a great place to visit. Here's a street, a narrow street with the shops, and it's a great way to get a feel for old Spain, I think, there. And it's so easy to get to from Madrid. You can, if you're there on your own, you can just hop on a train, and an hour you're there and spend the day there, and then come back later in the day. Going south to the other end of Spain, you can come down to the region of Andalusia. And again, you can do it by train from Madrid for 3 or 4 hours, get down to Seville, ancient city of Seville. Now, Cadiz is considered one of the oldest continually occupied cities in the world, established apparently way back by the Phoenicians. It's a great city too, but Seville is one that's more historic. This is where Columbus sailed out of here or right down from there, and a lot of history there. But then around here is the Costa del Sol, the Sun Coast around here, Malaga, all the way down to Gibraltar, and then Granada, where the Alhambra is. So Andalusia down in the south is a great place to visit, and you really need to keep that on your travel list. You can enjoy some local culture. So when you're in Andalusia, in Seville or Malaga, you can go to a flamenco show, which is quite interesting. The guitar music and the dance that goes back centuries, and it's throughout Spain, but particularly in this area. And then Andalusia, also known for the olives. See the olive groves here, as well as sherry and the Andalusian horses. So there's a lot of culture down in Andalusia. And then you go over to the coast, Malaga, Costa del Sol. And all along here, there's a lot of beaches and tourist places along here. And you go all the way to the bottom. Oh, no, then you go up about 2-hour ride from Malaga, you get to Granada and Alhambra. You go the other direction, you get down to Gibraltar. And I had a chance to take the group there last year, and that was fascinating. This is the Rock, Gibraltar. You get up there, it's been under British control for several centuries now. The Spanish won it back, the ongoing discussions. You have to have your passport because you actually cross over an international border when you go from Spain to Gibraltar. Now, if you go to the northwest, you get up to the Basque Country. Bilbao is the city there that's quite famous. Here's a Guggenheim. They have a great Guggenheim museum there, along with other attractions. And then there's a pilgrimage. I don't know who's up for this or for part of it. People hike the whole thing from France all the way over to Santiago, to Compostela, or you can just do part of it. But this is probably one of the most famous pilgrimages in the world, going from France all the way to the coast to the church where a miracle took place early on, Spain's Camino del Santiago pilgrimage. So I would say that if you're looking for a great post-pandemic adventure, you can't do wrong with Spain. If you've been there before, then you'll know it's a place it's a great place to return to. I'm looking forward to returning at some point myself. And if you haven't been to Spain, then for sure, you should make sure it's on your bucket list.